All right, hello everyone, good evening. My name is Brigitte Clements and I'm here to talk to you about systems and the circular economy and what it means for us as built environment practitioners. I am an architect by trade. I run an architecture development company called Loki. And my other hat, I am a part of ACAM, which is the Architects Climate Action Network. So my background is embedded in building physics and sustainability, and I've been in the climate space for about 20 years, which is a bit shocking to say. Circular economy, I'm presuming that you guys have heard of what circular economy is. And when I was first approached to do this talk, the basis and forefront of it was to discuss the circular economy, but I think that you guys are quite fluent on this already. And we know that what we're trying to reduce is us extracting raw materials and resource from the planet, using it and wasting it. So recycle, reduce, reuse, repurpose, reimagine. But I think we need to think a little bit beyond this and what that actually means, because it seems easy, and I think when we look at what that means in our everyday, it's just, okay, well, I'll recycle or I'll use a little bit less material, right? And there's a bit of a limited, narrow view. This is the consequence of our work. When we are sourcing materials for our kitchens or cabinetry or smart home systems, our computers. And obviously we want to be moving away from that into a circular model. So at risk of telling you what you guys already know, we've actually already become a little bit more sophisticated in understanding what circular economy is. Kian brought up a slide similar to this on Monday. And they've split it basically into biological nutrients. So, sourcing biological materials or bio-based materials, and at the end of life, returning that to the earth so we can, harvest those nutrients, minerals, and other elements. And then there's the technical nutrients. And technical is kind of our machinery, our minerals, our metals, right? And how we work with those. So when you're sourcing your materials or thinking about materiality and what that means in circular economy, we kind of divide it in these two elements. But beyond just sourcing something on the internet, how do we actually get to fundamentally changing a system and understanding what that means? If you haven't come across Naomi Klein or read her, please do. She is amazing. She's astounding. She's very engaging. And she was before her time, I think. And in, I think, her latest book, Capitalism versus the Climate, she talks about either climate disruption will change everything in our world around us, which we're aware of, or we do something about it. So what does this actually look like? Is there anybody here that actually thinks that's, not actually, that's a bit of a loaded question, but is there anybody here that thinks that the system that we're in is actually working for us, right? We're looking at the biggest environmental and climatic breakdown, in our human history, right? And we talk about post-capitalism, but we don't really know what that means. And the reason why I want to kind of talk about the systems change is because we have this discussion, and I have this discussion over and over and over again, and we sit there and say, yeah, we'll do this and this, and there's all these plans and movements, and then the question comes, yeah, but what about big business, and what about the corporates, and the oil companies, and the big governments, and developing countries, right? And then that is a blocker in the conversation. So when we're looking at circular economy, usually as architects, we focus very much on the circular part. But what about the economy? And we kind of sit there and say, well, it's not really our job to know about politics or finance or the economy or history of that. But that is absolutely incorrect. This is what we also need to become fluent in. Because as we've become more professional, we become more specialized, we've also gone into silos, so we don't even speak each other's language. We don't actually know how the other works. And I think what I want to talk to you about today, or what I'd like to achieve at the end of my talk is not to inform you about the circular economy or how to repurpose better or how to recycle better. It's actually to have a bit more of an optimistic view of the change that is happening and where we are in that position and what that means for us moving forward. Of course, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. A lot of this is quite obvious already, but we've been trading for a long time, and 6,000, 9,000 years ago, it was, cows. I'll give you my cows in exchange for lots of your grain, right? And then we started using different kinds of tools as a unit of exchange, so obsidian and stone. And fast forward, 1000 BC, we started actually developing our first units of currencies, monies. And this kind of developed into a new kind of wealth creation, and the feudal system came in. So this is where wealthy landowners let people work on their land and exchange. The farmers or the people working the land, they would be allowed to stay there. They'd have to give a good amount, usually, of their earnings back to the landowners. In exchange for being allowed to stay there. And as civilization got more sophisticated and trading got more sophisticated, the banking system was invented. And just quickly on the banking system, we've been banking for a long time. Actually, the stock market emerged before this, which is a very interesting thing. That the original stock market was there to start saving money so you could build ships and vehicles for trade. That was the origins of it. But we got a bit more sophisticated here. And then we started thinking about, loans and interest rates and profit. And then when you started seeing this big growth of profit. And at this time, we started trading. And mercantilism took hold. And we went further afield and we got better resources and we made more and more money. But every part of these economic transition, it wasn't a kind of top-down decision to say, okay, we're going to enter this era of the economy. It was a kind of collective movement, right? One that we're seeing also right now. And at every step of the way, because when we look at history, you think, okay, it was seamless and it was easy. They weren't going through these struggles. We've had resistance and opposition to every change in kind of economic changes. So just in this period, the aristocrats hated this. They hated the switch from feudalism because it meant that their social status was being blurred because people who had skills were able to make money and to make more money. So there was a blurring of that. So they were pushing against this. Also, the guildsmen were also very, very resistant to technologies. This is a familiar story of humankind, but I think it's very interesting to actually look at what was happening before. 1700s, I think, was a big change for everything. We had the French Revolution, and at the same time, the Industrial Revolution, two massive twin paralleled moments. And I think this was a reset in kind of European identity, but also that was a bit more global and that pushed onwards. And it was, if I'm working the land, I have a right to own that and own all the profits from that. That was some of the discussion going on there. And we became, from all of the wealth that we generated, or they generated through this period from all of this trading, they started investing into machines. And industrial capitalism kind of grew out of this, and you had the big economic thinkers, and you had more and more extreme wealth moving. And there was a question about, should this be driven by the state or should it be driven by the people, and how much interference should be involved here, and how should we drive it? Now, I find this really interesting because your grandparents probably were born before GDP became the metric by which we kind of understand how we measure things, right? And by measuring things, we become more adept to driving change, becoming more fluent in a system, and becoming more efficient, right? And this was the age of endless growth, right? The Homo economicus, as it's known. Now, Milton Friedman was a big proponent of the kind of economics that I think we're all pushing against. And he was famous for saying there's only one and only social responsibility of business, and that's to use our resources to make profits. That was the only metric, right? And we're getting to a little bit more of a sophisticated level there. So with the fall or the collapse of the Soviet Union and globalization, everything exploded all at once, and you had a huge boom economically, followed by a financial collapse in 2008. And I'm going to put at the end 2017, Kate Raworth, who I presume that you guys know, and if you don't, please do read her book, Donut Economics. I think history will look down on this book and this moment and this ideology as a pivotal change in the way we understand everything. Governments, industries, companies, different organizations, institutions, from education to business are all adopting a different way of thinking and trying to build out this vocabulary of modern economics. Now, I want to focus on the last 50 or so years. Ignore that. There's a relationship between global carbon emissions and GDP. It's staggering and it's stunning. And I know this is not surprising to you, but when we're discussing the climate challenge and we're discussing what circular economy actually means, and we're discussing what the sustainable future means, and when we're discussing what post-capitalism looks like, how do we decouple from this? Right? This is a challenge that we're always talking about. Now, the climate movement and the climate discussion is very depressing and very negative. And I'd like to just breathe a little bit of optimism into here. It was only in 1958 that scientists for the first time started to see a link between fossil fuels and the changing climate. That's when Kearns is going to come back to me later and discuss this. But this is when they started publishing documents, it became a bit more literate, and it started being distributed to governments and organizations around the world. In 1988, the IPC was established, and this is also incredible. This is actually when the knowledge became so widespread and adept and taken upon and seriously that globally, countries, governments, and scientists all came together to see what they could do about it. A few years later, the UK had its first wind farm. We had 10 wind turbines. Just quickly, I want to fast forward. We now have 11,500 wind turbines in the UK. It's one of the most in the world. And I think just when you look at the short amount of time and the rapid rate of how we're developing and changing, I mean, the amount of investment, of organizing, of ranging, and of agreeing, of planning to get to this point in such a short amount of time is incredible. 1994, first climate legislation comes into force. And almost 200 countries sign up to this, right? So this is, I mean, I was just a bit younger than you guys when this was happening. So this is all very, very new. 2003, probably around the time that many of you were born, scientists start linking these extreme weather events to climate change. So this is like a new knowledge. We're learning really, really on the hoof here. 2008 was very exciting. The UK passed its first Climate Change Act. 2015, the Paris Agreement, right? At 2015, this is just a few years ago. This is when we started actually having like a very, very specific target that everybody agreed to. You can argue whether or not this is enough or if it's realistic, but the point is that we're starting to find a common language in a climate grammar that we can start actually building upon and finding solutions to. It is the age of mass extinction, and I'll get onto this a little bit later, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's basically a third of our natural habitats are at risk. The UK was the first country to pass the net zero emissions law. I know that our current Prime Minister has put a little bit of a spanner in the works here. However, I'm still fairly optimistic on this, and I'll get to that also a little bit later. But now we also understand that the climate change is inevitable, and the questions about adaptation, mitigation, and what we're going to be doing about that. I think language is very important. And when we talk about economics, you use all these kind of abstract systems. It's very, very simple. It's the way we, as society and practitioners, use our natural resources to create what we need, right? It's as simple as that. Kate Raworth's idea of donut economics is very, very simple. It's basically meeting human needs, which is the kind of center of the donut, so trying to address things like poverty, homelessness, shelter, safety, all the kind of needs that we need without pushing through the external boundaries of the donuts, and those are our planetary boundaries. So how can we actually prosper, not just individually or nationally or regionally, but globally, but actually not push through the planetary boundaries, especially when we've seen how much destruction we've done specifically in the last 150 years, right? And we see that most of the world, much of the world is not yet developed. So it's a big question, right? This is where we are right now. We're not doing so well. But I think just by being able to measure this and understand this and talk about this in a different way, we can start trying to understand how we can start tackling these. And again, you're seeing a lot of businesses and organizations and the way that you guys are communicating with each other going from a central kind of enterprising model to one that is far more decentralized and as a network, right? So we're seeing these kind of models translated also to, just our everyday interactions, social interactions, business interactions. And I think that there's many reasons to be optimistic. This document goes on for pages and pages and pages. These are just climate laws. They're quite big, just passed in the last year. And I always hear this kind of complaint of the other. Here are just some businesses that I've pulled up. Now, it's your job to also kind of look into these, but I'll just give a couple of examples. Allbirds is a shoe company, and you see a lot of these kind of fashion. I know it's not in our realm, but we do kind of have similar design processes using materiality, and they are already designing for end of life, for reuse of materials. A lot of these companies are already carbon neutral. I think what's exciting about Allbirds, I don't know if you use them, they use natural materials. They're on the forefront of developing new materiality, and they have a carbon footprint tool which they've open sourced. And I think this is something that we're also seeing change, whereas 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everybody was using, their climate innovations and, let's say, inventions as their intellectual property, as their USP business tool. And now we're starting to open source it and share and learn from each other. Check it out, it's pretty interesting. Patagonia, I don't know if you know Patagonia, outdoor clothing company. They changed their whole model and they gave the ownership of their business to a nonprofit organization called the Holdfast Collective. And they've done many, many things. One is also they're finding a way to reuse their clothes and to share information about how people can repair and reuse their clothes. But I think most interesting is Patagonian's profits are going completely to combating climate change and protecting undeveloped land across the world. So I think, you've got Microsoft, you've got IKEA, you've got these big, big companies. Also, probably the most surprising is Ørsted, which was an oil and natural gas company. And it took a decade for them to transform their business model. And they are now the largest wind power company. So they completely transitioned from oil and gas to wind. And I think we need to start moving away from this language of the decisions we're making are quite small, and we'd like to do things, and the bad guys are over there, because we're seeing transformation and change everywhere. Now, I know that it's not all good, and I know that a lot of it is greenwash, but there are a lot of good initiatives going out there, and I think we need to move away from kind of more hostile and combative language when we're talking about climate change and each other in business, to how we can all work together and how we can all kind of do our part and learn from each other. This is a nice graphic. This is, I don't know if you can see, but the blue lines at the top that go around are our natural kind of ecosystem reserves. The green are our mineral reserves, and the purple are our fossil fuel reserves. And it's a timeline about monitoring kind of how long these stocks will last. And if you zoom in a little bit, if nothing changes, we've got about 13 years left before we're going to have Arctic freeze summers. 2050, I mean, that's when many of you guys are going to be my age, and I'm not that old. Third of land, plant, and animal species will be extinct. So it's really, really around the corner here. Now, we don't actually know how many animal species there are on the world, but we do know that the rate of extinction as it is between 0.01% and 1%, or 0.1% per year. And so if there are 100 million species, different species on Earth, we're looking at 10,000 species going each year. The left is a nice little graphic of endangered animals here on the British Isles. And I think just focusing on one thing like the bee, if the bee disappeared off the face of the Earth, we would have 4 years to live. Now, design-wise, what does that mean for us? I think, we've been talking about bees for a while. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you talk about making bee habitats or green corridors and spaces, and it was really hard to contextualize what that meant. And that's why we need to start becoming a bit more fluent in subjects outside of our own silo. And I have a bit more of a sophisticated understanding, because we can't just sit there and say, all right, I'm going to only use bio-based materials and it's all eco. I think we need to start understanding how things are harvested, how things are grown, what they mean, and the richer complex of these things. I mean, the oak tree is incredible. 2,300 species are supported by a single oak tree. 326 species depend on the oak tree for their survival. And 229 species are rarely found on other trees than oak. That's amazing as an ecosystem. And this is not including microbiomes and kind of mosses and things. So it's an incredible ecosystem in itself. So I think we need to also start understanding the nuance of that. Now, some of these graphics are, I like infographics because it just captures in a very quick snapshot where we are. And we are basically on the bottom left, buildings. That's what we look at as architects, and that's what we think our kind of remit is. But I would argue that energy, the red on the top left, land use, how we start developing the land, how we start using it, how we start regrowing it, how we start bridging it, industry, how we work with industry, transport, how, what our urban environments look like, how we control how the stocks and flows of things. All of this is actually part of what we do. We are not just buildings. So, how to get the world to net zero carbon? I didn't actually like this, but I thought it's simple and snappy, and it went with a previous graphic. And it seems reduce emissions, great, we know how to do that. Decarbonized energy, it's a bit more out of our control. We can source it, but boosted carbon sinks, increased energy efficiency. And I think everyone probably knows the graphics and the informations and the data of what proportion of global carbon emissions is directly related to the built environment. But as I showed a couple of slides before, I think it goes far beyond that. I think just, defining it by that, because we also have to start looking at kind of territorial understandings of stocks and flows, of how we enable our spaces. If you look at Singapore, for example, it's a very efficient, very modern city, but It functions solely because of all the resources and materials that it gets from a huge area around it. So it doesn't function only by itself. And the good news is that you guys are going to have jobs. It is expected that we're going to have to double our floor area by 2060. Maybe not in the UK, and how we do that in the UK might be a different question. But the fact is that the world is becoming wealthier. We are seeing a lot of development, and we're going to do that growth. So how do we do that growth within the planetary boundaries? And how do we look through all development and all change and all design criteria through the lens of first understanding where our materials are coming from and what's happening at the end? Materiality, I think, is one of the bigger topics for us. Yeah, I mean, I just pulled this off the Kingspan website this week. Yeah, Kingspan is a super insulating material. It's one of the most eco materials according to Kingspan. If you go on the web, it's the Wild West. The fact is that it's still legal for them to be saying this. I mean, look at this. This is polystyrene, plastic, metal. I think you also have to just use your common sense, you guys. I came back to the UK after working and practicing in Switzerland, and there's very different building materials and construction techniques and materiality there. And so when I came here, I had to learn all about all of our building materials here, and there's so many things that were eco, and I thought, but it doesn't actually make sense. It takes about anywhere from, I can't think of it right now, but it's 500 years? 500 to 1,000 years for polystyrene to break down? It says 1,000 to a million. Thank you. That screen is right. I'm wrong. It's astounding. That just, it doesn't even make sense. And it's not just about that breaking down, but it's what is released when this breaks down. You know, it's toxic. We're killing so many great organisms and in our soils and our earth. And I think we're also looking at things through a very, very simple lens. You know, thermal efficiency is the one lens, right? The Grenfell Tower, they believe most people actually died from smoke inhalation. Now, smoke inhalation is bad. Celotex, which was the cladding material, has the highest rating toxicity levels, right? So we need to also be looking at health. So when you're looking at circular economy, it's not just about materials that we extract and then what we're going to make sure that at the very end we're not going to throw it in the bin. It's actually the whole ecology of that material and its health implications, how it makes us feel, the well-being index, the animals, the natural environment. So yeah, I think just for us, I think in the first step, become material literate. This was a small study I did years ago where we did an extension on a house. It was a simple project, but then just also I used it as an opportunity to explore a little bit about different materialities. Because one of the things was, you know, eco-construction, eco-builds are nice, but they're more expensive. But are they? And how much more? And how do you understand and value that worth? So I did a kind of cross-comparison of different wall build-ups and breaking down the cost of each of those materials and how much you would need and how effective and how efficient they were. And as you see, I mean, is there a little red dot? Yeah, great. So this is, light steel gauge and masonry cavity wall here. That's 214 pounds per square meter. And then right below, you've got a timber frame with masonry cavity wall. That's 190 pounds. But the costings are not that different per square meter. There was a porotherm clay block that we found that we were able to reuse. And we used some natural insulation for that. That's 193 pounds per square meter. So basically, in this one small little exercise, I was able to call bullshit. And nobody talked about the price. Everyone just said, it's more expensive to build eco. How much more expensive, and how worth it is it? This is a very simple matrix. This is prices from just a few years ago. Things have changed a lot since then. But I just did a very, very simple graphic of different material types and cross-comparing embodied carbon, thermoconductivity, reusability, and obviously also our methods and processes and technologies are changing. Architects are problem solvers. That's what we do. Designers are problem solvers. And I think it's just about designing intelligently. And I think this is a great example. The Crystal Palace, built in 1851, was originally erected in Hyde Park. It was always going to be disassembled and put up again. I think it was up for about 3 or 4 years, and then rebuilt. And if you think about the technology they had at that time in 1851, they were able to erect that with just a few people. They didn't have huge amounts of machinery and cranes and all of that. And they were able to dismount it and build it up again. If they can do it then, we should be able to do it right now. This is a temporary pavilion for the Dutch Design Week a few years ago. I can't remember exactly when. But it wasn't that long ago. It was within 5 years. And what I like about this project is that the designers, they used not just recycled and reused materials, but they borrowed materials. They went out to their network and they used it. And why not? I mean, you don't have to just apply this only to building materials, but also spaces. There's some spaces that are demolished and they're not going to be reused for the next few years. Can we use those spaces for social purpose? Can we borrow that space? What can we borrow from each other? I don't need to go into this too much, but I'd like to just celebrate what we can do with retrofit and reuse. I saw a presentation earlier this week about the M&S building, which has been saved, and the rendering of the new building, which, you can think what you want about it, but I was looking at the new render for that building, and it's so generic. It could be any city, it could be anywhere. And I just think, really, in 50 years, 100 years, when we're talking about our cultural legacy, our history, our identity, and wherever you are, what that means, I think we will look happily on celebrating what was there and how we've adapted that. Probably the biggest growth area, and one of the most exciting ones, is how we understand green spaces and our ecology, and how we start designing into this, doing ecological restoration corridors, and actually building this fabric. Right now we have cities and we've got a green belt, and there's this war of whether or not we should build in the green belt or not, and it's an oversimplified argument. It needs to be a bit more nuanced, a bit more sophisticated around that. And I think there's win-win situations, right? I mean, what if we just planted green roofs on all of the roofs here in London, for example, right? Obviously, there's a structural implication, but yes, I've got an engineer in the front rows giving me the eyes. But I think we can enhance our livability, make beautiful environments, clean the air, work with flooding, work with our natural environment. And this, I think, is a great great project. This architect designed a few ones that are similar to this. But, and I was going to, water is probably our most precious resource and the one that we're going to be fighting with and struggling with in the next couple of years. But I just like this project a lot for its design. And what they did was, this is up in Ethiopia, and it's a water tower that uses condensation to collect dew. They're dew towers. And it can extract up to 100 liters of water a day, just from the kind of diurnal temperature shifts. Again, I spoke about this a bit earlier. The project on the bottom, Lacaton Vassal, I think it's a fantastic project. And again, at the time, this was really hard for them to sell in as a project, right? Like they wanted to demolish this. They had a lot of problems kind of trying to convince everybody to do it, but in the end, everyone that was living in that building got to stay in the building while it was done. They got to extend their living space. I mean, it's a far more beautiful building. It's a far more comfortable building. It's very, very clever. I mean, I think it's an incredible piece of architecture and architectural thinking. And community building. The 15-minute city, it's a very, very simple and frankly not a very avant-garde idea. It is the village. It is that within walking distance, we have access to doctors and shops and gardens. But even that has come under attack. And I think it's really interesting that, interesting is maybe not the right word, disappointing, that the climate challenge has become a very polarized and political view. These are two conservative MPs who don't like the 15-minute city. And it was interesting because I gave a talk last week where I also discussed this, and somebody pushed me on this, and they said, yes, but they're right. I mean, we need less control, and already, we're going to be charged when we go and see a doctor at a different area outside of our 15-minute bubble, and there's going to be a lot of controls and CCTVs, and we're going to be ticketed, and this is very important, you guys, because we have to listen to each other. So I listened to this person, and we discussed it, and it's these evil politicians. And it's like, if you're not happy with the politics, get involved with politics. Call your local MP. Get involved. Actually figure out what it is that's happening, but also understand if what you are reading and hearing in the news is actually true. This doesn't even make sense. What is sinister and what we shouldn't tolerate about 15-minute cities is the idea that local councils can decide how often you go to the shops, and that they ration who uses the roads and when, and they police it all with CCTV. This was said at the Conservative Party conference a couple of weeks ago. I'm disappointed with our politics. And I think this is not new. I think many of us are disappointed by our politics, but I'm also really happy to see the reaction to our politics. After Rishi Sunak made his U-turn on climate policies, I went to the Daily Mail and just to see how the article is being portrayed. And then I went to the comments, thinking, Daily Mail readers, blah, blah, blah. And it was fantastic. The debates that were going on, what people were saying, everybody thinks we're going in the wrong direction if we go according to what the conservatives want to be going. And, Galileo had this issue as well. He said, we might not be flat. The earth might not be flat. And the church went and persecuted him and threw him into prison. And he died after several years of house arrest. So I think if you wait for, the politics, and if you wait for the system to change, it might never come. We are the change. Reasons to be cheerful. I'm looking forward to the next election cycle. And I think become engaged, become loud, become vocal, become a part of the movement, join groups. There's a lot of student groups, there's StuCan, there's ACAN, there's UKGBC, there's loads of action groups, and get to know who your politicians are. Bill Clinton's political advisor became famous because on the television he just said, it's the economy, stupid. And since then, all political leaders around the world basically figured out that that is true. If we've got a strong political agenda and we talk about growth, then we've got a better chance of getting in. And that's what has been happening since then. But it's not, it's the environment. And we're actually seeing this language change a lot. We're seeing governments change. We're seeing, the agenda in the school, in our communities. I mean, just me in the last few years, I think my first project here in the UK after coming back, I think it was about 5 years ago, and I wanted to start understanding the embodied carbon. Nobody was talking about embodied carbon. Now everyone's talking about embodied carbon. Now it's being, we're talking about regulating it, understanding it. It's becoming a fluency. The speed at which we are becoming very fluent and know it and learns in sustainability is impressive. And I think, you are going to be learning about materials in the course of, this curriculum and this program, probably the rest of your life. And like I said, I think I'm not really here to tell you how to do it or what that means, but just, to encourage you that you are on the cusp of this change, of this wave that's happening. It's happening everywhere. And I love this. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So be thought leaders and push for change and trust yourselves. Thank you. And here's the agenda for the Materials Matters Deconstruct workshop. Any questions?
Thank you very much. It's a very good way of seeing the circular economy. And I agree a lot on the economy part. But I think that, and probably I'm wrong, but what I have been thinking about is that the way we value things is the problem. Because we value things just for the first part, which is the extraction of the material and the process in the industry that takes money. But then we forget about the rest. And I think that we need politics to change that, and as soon as possible, because as soon as you develop the whole economy that is after you use the material, then the economy itself is not a problem. The endless growth is not a problem as soon as you take into account whatever happens with this material in the future. So I think that we can still have the same model. I'm not a defender of the model, but I think that will be very difficult to change. But change the way you value things will make a big shift on the market and on the conception of everything. So, for example, XPS is very cheap, insulates a lot, but has a very short life. Why to use it, right? So I think that is Europe with the with the levels that they said that stop thinking about the price of the things and think about the life cycle cost. Yeah. That is attached to the life cycle carbon, but makes much more sense in terms of circular economy. Otherwise, there is no point. It's not a question, it's a reflection, but I think that the way we can see things and be more objective is as soon as we can change this point of view.
Yes. No. I mean, and there's nothing to challenge or debate on this, but what I do find interesting is it's only very recently that I have started hearing more about value and how we value things and what value means. And I think this is also a big trend of what's changing now, and this kind of legacy thing and what's going to be happening. And, the moments that we start seeing that, we might not have, a healthy environment for our children or our grandchildren, etc. I think we're now starting to think about what's going to happen beyond us and a bit further. So, I don't think I landed the point so well before. But yeah, when I was talking about these kind of economic systems, I think we were driven into a language where we measured everything by that one sole metric, which was cost, and that was our value. How much is something worth is we put a price tag on it. And that was just a very simple linear thing. And I think going back to, when GDP was introduced, now we realize it's such a simple and silly metric. It's so one-dimensional. It doesn't even make sense anymore. And I think now what we're seeing is we're seeing a little bit more of a complex matrix of how to assess the value and the quality of something beyond kind of price. And now it's just beyond price and value. Right? So I think this kind of sophisticated language is making us understand what the definition of value really is.
In fact, one of my favorite examples is when I was a kid. I used to buy, Cokes, Fantas, or whatever, and beers for my family. And you go to the bar, you give them your old bottles, and then they give you new ones that were refilled from the old ones that probably you used at the time. Glass bottles. But then suddenly someone decided was cheaper to every time melt the glass and do it again. And I think that this concept of is cheaper is the problem. So we need to move from cheap just for what is to produce the bottle, rather than think in all the damage that you produce. And then this cost is the one that we should look at. Because then many things make sense. So if you go for, I don't know, wood fiber as an insulation layer, you will see that, come on, it's cheap. Because the consequences of this product are not there. If you go for XPS, you have this problem, right? So I think that this is very interesting. And about the GDP, I think that you are right, that was a metric that is very simple. At some point it was useful, but right now it's not useful anymore because all this internet business and all these things that are happening there will destroy this concept anyway. So what I like from the model, what is happening nowadays with this economics model is that the things that are not useful die by itself. Mm. But we need to shift that because we have a country, or we have a part of the world that is the producers of everything. And they are the producers of everything because they are cheaper. And that's the main problem. Yeah. So unless we globalize, change what is happening nowadays, that we look for the cheapest product, we won't change.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. There's there's a thing that's a bit missing in the cost of materials, and that's externalities. And externalities are, the kind of unintended consequences of the production of things. And they can be negative or they can be positive. And for too long, we've kind of just accepted that that's kind of just lost cost. That's fine. But now we're starting to change that language and see how we can start to embed, pollution, for example, into the cost of materials that will help kind of shape and drive our decision making. And I think, again, this question of is it cheaper to, produce new glass bottles rather than kind of taking them and cleaning them and reusing them again. I think we're starting to find, a bit more of a complex understanding of all of the things that are attached to the production of that, and it's not just cost. And when you start embedding all of those extra costs, then it's not actually as cheap as what we're talking about.
Thank you. I'd like to continue with that a little bit. Oscar Wilde, was it? Said
Oscar Wilde?
Yeah. His definition of a cynic was the person who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Yes.
I admire your optimism, but more I admire your exhortation for us, for students and young architects to become advocates for change. And I think having some kind of literacy in we began with things like life cycle, but the way we describe value, and we should use that much more than, or we should make the difference between price and value, should start to include more broader ecological knowledge and sensibility. And if there are ways we can incorporate that in our, Wolf will come to it later, but in our pitches for projects and the way we describe them, and for people like me as academics in the way we write about them, then maybe that's a potential route to start strongly differentiating between price and value. Maybe.
Yes. And I think I'm also optimistic. I'm not just blindly optimistic. I think I spent so many years being ill because I was cold and, I didn't want to turn on the heating. And I was really aware of, my personal carbon footprint and, hitting my head against the wall. And I'm hugely encouraged by the change. And I feel like I'm part of a movement. And, you're seeing curriculums change. You're seeing climate literacy, it's starting to be embedded in many different levels. There's now a feeling that if you're not actually engaging with sustainability, you're kind of going to get left behind. That's very new. And we are storytellers. You guys learn how to make beautiful graphics and have a sequence of drawings and imagery and words to kind of explain a story. And that's what our power is as architects. You'll walk out of school and you'll walk into the real world and you will see that, what we say and how we present it, it is very impactful, and we are able to, drive a lot of change and decisions from that. And I think once you start being able to, in a convincing and articulate and thoughtful way, consider all these implications, then you will be able to start embedding these kinds of changes. I mean, by the time I'm finished with this conversation, by the time, the year ends, by the time next year, I mean, we're going to have new innovations and new technologies and new metrics for measuring things. I mean, the landscape is changing so quickly. I mean, this is my day job. This is what I do day in and day out, and I have to keep up to date every single day. It's incredible what's happening, right? So it is very exciting, but at the same time, we need to learn more about what it is that we're doing, and also we need to start making alliances and collaborations with other stakeholders and sharing what we don't know and how we can start working together to leverage that.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
I was really intrigued by your quick romp through the models, the economic models we've inherited over the last 5,000 years, and your connection to the need for us to become more literate in understanding this inheritance. And I guess my question is, I'm intrigued to know whether you think there might be a moment in which this great transition we're in and the new language that we're building together about this transition, this moment, might enable us to even stretch beyond our habits of mind to consider what a slow growth economy might mean. Because I think a lot of this, the language has always been about rapid growth, the great acceleration, the hockey sticks. Well, is that something that we are tacitly accepting as the only viable way forward? And if not, at which point would we be ready to countenance a real paradigm shift? Because, is it a transition to make the current model more, I don't want to use sustainable because I have a big issue with that term,
Effective.
More livable, or is it a transition to something else? And how long do we prepare for that? What do we need to prepare for that?
I mean, I think coming together in discussions like this, and I actually really like this forum because it's an open discussion, which I think we should be having more of. And yeah, I think we should be dreaming beyond not just slow growth, but degrowth.
I didn't want to use the D word because
I know.
It comes. So I kind of threw the slow grenade, into the room because we can't not consider it.
I've spoken about degrowth at a conference, and I just watched people implode in front of me. It was amazing. Just not actually be fundamentally able to understand. But you will also, I'm guessing, experience this, that there's some people where you're even talking about something like a circular economy, and they just can't get their heads around it. It doesn't even make sense. And for others, it's so obvious. And then you're already starting to look at the next model. So I think that there's levels of maturity in this growth. And I think we need to be also flexible and open that not everybody's at the same point in this trajectory as us. And we can't, I think, also force our standard. I mean, there's obviously a lot of countries that are in a very different situation from us, and we might need to, give them a little bit of space to kind of go through their curve, but help them kind of get that bell curve done quicker and actually, learn or lead by, our examples. I do think we will get to a point. I mean, Kate Raworth talks about thriving. There's a great podcast where on leading where she's interviewed, and it's great because Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, they're trying to understand what she's talking about, and they just can't really get their heads around it. But in in their interviews since, they kind of come back to it. So you can see that these seeds are starting to be planted. And I think that's what's happening. This is like the great seed planting. But I think in the end, the concept of enough, I think what we all want is we want to do what we're passionate about, see how good we can actually be, have a good life quality. I think hang out with friends, go and experience nice things, eat good foods, and make money, and make enough money to survive. And I think that's the whole ikigai thing, which is sweeping us, right? That's kind of, for many people, this is, that big, realization moment. But it's not, I think, understanding enough and what that means. I think we are starting to get to that point, and you're already seeing models and countries starting to adopt ideas that are leading to something beyond growth.
Okay, Brigitte, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.